Welcome. I would like to begin by acknowledging that University of British Columbia, Okanagan is situated in the territory of the Silks Okanagan Nation and their peoples. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many different places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. Today, we come together in a conversation inspired by the global protests against anti-Black racism. It is a very special moment. There is huge hope for change, but there is also a lot of work ahead of us. This is also a response to the Different Together pledge that was initiated by the Honorable Janet Austin, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Her Honor Janet Austin to give us a few words to get us started today.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee Reed. I'm very grateful for the invitation to join you today. I just wish that it could be in person. But I want to thank you also for convening what I think is an essential conversation for our time, and I'm honored to be asked to participate. I will say, however, that I accepted with a little bit of reluctance, and that's because I'm keenly aware that there are many voices better equipped and more deserving than mine to share this stage and to shed light on this important discussion. But I've accepted because as a person who holds a leadership position of enormous privilege, I believe that with that privilege comes responsibility to use my platform to good purpose and to do what I can to bring profile to critical issues, contemporary issues for our society. So that's why I'm here. It's that belief that led to the creation of the Different Together campaign. But I do hope that you understand that I offer my comments today with humility and respect for the experience of those whose lives have been scarred by systemic racism. When I assumed the role of Lieutenant Governor, I identified 3 themes that would guide my work throughout the term of my mandate. And one of them was to promote inclusion, diversity, and equality in all facets of Canadian society. It's anchored in my belief in the common humanity of all people, and it reflects my previous professional and volunteer work addressing historic and current inequalities economically and culturally entrenched in our society. I've worked to execute this in my role as Lieutenant Governor in a number of different ways, some of which have included initiatives in a partnership with UBC. One would be our work commemorating the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalization of homosexuality. We worked together on issues of democracy, violence against women, and many others, and I want to thank UBC for being such a fabulous partner. The Different Together campaign came about because I was approached earlier this spring by a number of people in the business community, the Asian community, and by the Premier's office on behalf of the Legislative Assembly. They asked me whether I was willing to provide leadership in responding to increasing incidents of anti-Asian violence. I was deeply honored to be asked, but I also questioned whether I was the right person. But what I heard was that there was very strong feeling among the people who had approached me that this should not be left to the Asian community to defend themselves, and that leaders like me, who have the privilege of prominence and a voice and a platform, need to be prominent in speaking up. But given my past work, I felt it was important to frame the initiative with a unifying message that would also reflect the racism experienced by others, by Indigenous peoples, Black peoples, persons of color, and those who have experienced anti-Semitism, all of which have been problems in Canada and British Columbia in recent years. I felt it was important to bring diverse peoples together, so leaders in government, business, and education and community service to work together on this. And we launched the Different Together pledge at the end of May. The goal was to inspire British Columbians to affirm the values of diversity as fundamental to Canadian society and to make a public commitment to oppose racism and hate in all its forms, both in words and in actions. It's not something that's intended to be attached permanently to the office of the Lieutenant Governor, but rather to give it a push out into the world and hope that it would become a positive movement through which diverse peoples could share stories and ideas that we can all learn from. And we've certainly been heartened by the overwhelmingly positive response to the campaign. So subsequent to the launch, the murder of George Floyd has reminded us all most forcefully of the systemic racism experienced by Black Americans and Canadians. We're now witnessing the emergence of a very powerful movement through demonstrations in the United States and Canada, and an outpouring of very legitimate frustration, sadness, and rage that's built up over hundreds of years. It's mobilized people throughout our society, and we've seen commitments from many leaders to do better. It's also evoked a much needed and pretty broad-based public dialogue about the barriers to overcoming racism, and our conversation, of course, is an important part of all of that. So I think that engaging constructively on this issue is and will continue to be difficult and messy and sometimes confusing and emotionally charged, but that's all part of making things better and moving forward. I think, like many of you, I find myself reflecting on how best to continue this work and what is the best role that I can play in it. How do we engage deeply and constructively on these issues? And I think it's a time for us all to reach out across the boundaries that divide people in society and attempt most sincerely and deeply to listen more thoughtfully to the experience of others, to engage in those challenging but real conversations that can deepen public understanding and lead us to some of the solutions that we seek as a society. These are systemic problems, and they will require a systemic response. And this is not going to be simple or immediate. It will involve sacrifice and compromise for many, and a shared commitment to transition and work together towards a better future. I wanted to tell you that personally, I've resolved to do my best to listen with humility and respect, to learn from the stories of those whose lives have been scarred by the experience of racism, violence, and hate, and to be part of building that better world. We're looking at steps that we can next take through the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, so we'll be posting a new blog post soon that will build on the work that we started with the Different Together campaign, that hopefully will provide some ideas for people for how they can contribute, how they can make a difference, where they can find useful information to learn, to educate themselves, and to make some choices about how they stand up and speak up themselves. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation and to the question and answer portion as well. All the best, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being part of this event today. I now call upon Professor Deborah Buzzard, our Deputy Vice Chancellor and Principal, to give us her remarks.
Thank you, Ananya, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very, very pleased to be a part of this really important conversation today and to be with such a distinguished group of students, university, and community leaders. My role is not to be here as the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Principal, but rather to help to provide this platform for others to raise and share their voices, and then for me to sit back and listen, which I will do. I want to extend a personal thank you to Your Honor, who has helped to initiate this conversation with the Different Together Pledge, and whose presence here has helped to expand the reach of this platform, which was oversubscribed today. So we're delighted to have that extra push. Before I pass on to the spotlight to the panelists, I want to echo something that our President, Santa Ono, said the other day in his statement against racism and injustice. He said, "We must recognize and help dismantle the tools of oppression and white supremacy that remain prevalent and entrenched in our everyday systems. And we must work together to create communities where we embrace difference and work to build each other up in the name of dignity, mutual respect, and justice." As Santa rightly recognized, great universities like UBC are uniquely positioned to generate and mobilize knowledge that can transform systems of oppression and to support emerging leaders that can help realize positive change on our campuses and in our communities. I want to thank the student panelists for your leadership, not just today, but every day. It's essential that we listen to your voices and other racialized scholars in the academic community, and not just when tragedies or demonstrations occur. Indeed, it is our obligation and commitment to stand with those whose voices have been traditionally, systemically, and historically marginalized, and to support them in their pursuit of prominent positions at our university and beyond, so that your voices can always be heard. I want to thank you for being here today as voices of members of the UBC Black community. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Professor Buzzard, for those words. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's conversation. Perpetua Pep Muthui is a passionate advocate for designing workplaces and communities that are inclusive and that empower members to be creative and innovative. She has over 15 years of experience within various industries in Canada and Africa. Currently, Pep is the Inclusion Action Plan strategist at UBC Okanagan, working closely with my office and as part of the Equity and Inclusion Office team. PEP's focus is on the implementation and evaluation of policies, programs, and initiatives with the aim of embedding equity and inclusion across the Okanagan campus. Over to you, Pep.
Thank you, Ananya. I'd like to begin by focusing on why we are gathered today. It does matter to listen to Black voices. There is wisdom and knowledge that comes from moving through the world as a Black person, not just now, but for the past hundreds of years. We must honor the pain and grief that is being lived and felt within the Black community at UBC Okanagan and beyond. We must uplift the voices of youth who are building not just their own futures, but everyone's future. This panel discussion is a moment to pause and listen and to shift this pain into an opportunity to transform the UBC Okanagan. We must move beyond rhetoric and collectively commit to changing the systems around us. I am new in Kelowna, and these past 2 weeks, I have had the opportunity to listen to Black students, faculty, and staff at both Okanagan as well as the Vancouver campus. There were consistent stories of Black people constantly being reminded that they are different and feeling excluded. There is an African proverb that says, it takes a village to raise a child. It really does take a village for equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts to become real. We all have a role to play in ensuring that Black people feel welcome and safe at UBC and even in the larger community. I would now like to invite each of our panelists to speak so we may listen and learn from them and their experiences. Following that, we'll have an open floor to questions and discussions. And to facilitate the discussion this afternoon, we'll be using the question and answer function to ask a question for any of our panelists. You can click the question and answer icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. And just a note, the Honorable Janet will also be will be able to respond to the questions as well. As this forum aims to center the conversation on our Black student voices, we'll begin here. I'd like to first introduce Jane Udochi, second year art student and president of the UBC Okanagan African Caribbean Student Club. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Pep. As Pep introduced, I am Jane. I am the new elected president of the ACSC Club here at the Okanagan campus on UBC. And I am very happy to be here and very happy to be a part of this conversation. And we are here today to address a situation that, although for many may come as a surprise, for others, it has been our reality for quite some time now. And this is what this meeting essentially is about. It's to address that underspoken reality. As a Black individual, I have felt the need to damp down my personality to fit the constraints that the world has offered me. I did not believe I was capable. I did not believe that I was able. And I started to realize a whole generation of those who shared the same color as me, the same skin color as me, felt the same. To me, there is one good thing that has come out of this dire situation, and that is the fact that Black people as a whole are forcing the world to look and acknowledge that we are here, that we exist, that we are capable, and that we are able. We are leaders. Within the world, we can see on various platforms protests which highlight Black people on the forefronts of these protests. They're reclaiming their leadership and their voice through the established means, again, which in this case is a protest. Ironically, the ACSC, the African Caribbean Student Club, is my platform. It's my protest. The ACSC has given Black people a space to voice their opinions and how they feel. It is the ideal home away from home, and not just for me, but for thousands of Black students within this campus and within the Kelowna community. It is a welcoming space and invites students of all backgrounds, not just students of Black backgrounds, to have a space within campus where they can all be themselves. I hope for every single one of you watching this today who feel like you have no voice, either find or create your own ACSC, become a leader. And for the Black people tuning in today, you are capable, you are amazing, and you are a leader. Thank you, and back to you, Pep.
Thank you, Jane. I'd now like to invite Binta Si-Se to speak. Binta is a second-year international relations major. She is also an equity and inclusion assistant in the UBC Okanagan Equity and Inclusion Office. Over to you, Binta.
Thank you so much, Pep. I'd like to begin by saying how honored I am to join this conversation that's long overdue but very well needed, especially in the current climate of the world. And anti-Black racism is something that's not only so prominent in the white community, but also amongst people of color. And I say this just to distinguish that the Black experience is so different from people of color, because in the same circle of people of color, we still face discrimination, harassment, and injustices from these people that we're supposed to be in the same circle with. So I would like to also urge people to check their biases, and also ask yourselves why you think the way you think, why you have these stereotypic thoughts against Black people, towards Black people, and also acknowledge your white privilege. Use it for good. Use it to change the system that has been made up to oppress Black people. And I say this because as Black people, we have tried for years and years and years to change the system, but then at the end of the day, the system has to be changed by white people because the system was never made to favor us. The system was not made to favor Black people. The system was made to favor white people. So it is the job of white people to just undo this whole systematic racism that has been going on for years and years. I also get this question a lot, which is, I've also been hearing it, especially these days on social media, from different people as well. What can I do to support the Black community? Or what can I do to be an anti-racist? Or what can I do to use my white privilege for good? Well, step one, don't ask this question to a Black person because we already have so much on our plates dealing with how to maneuver our Black bodies in a world where we're looked down upon, we're harassed, we're discriminated against, and we're treated unjustly every single day. So it's unfair to add this extra burden on top of our plate. But I will answer this question today. So step two, take initiative. Take initiative to educate yourselves about the Black experience. Even if you type this question, how do I become an anti-racist on Google, so many resources will come up. There's so many books like White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist. There's so many TV shows like there's so many TV shows like The 13th. And there's so many podcasts, there's so many websites like Black Lives Matter, there's so many resources on that website to cater for different communities as well. So I urge everyone to just take initiative, educate yourselves, because then you become prepared for step 3, which is becoming an active ally instead of a performative one. When you educate yourselves about the Black experience, you know what to do to support the Black community. You know that you're supposed to center Black voices in every single plan of yours to support the Black community. Step 4, spread what you have learned. Educate others. Also call out friends that might not be as educated as you are on the Black experience, and also family members. I have come across so many situations where people know so much about the Black experience, but the people that are surrounding them unfortunately do not. So it's also your job to educate the people around you. Step 5, support the Black community in a way that's very sustainable. For example, Black businesses. There's so many Black-owned brands. There's so many Black businesses around wherever you might be. It's important to support those Black initiatives, Black businesses, Black brands. Also companies, especially I've been seeing these days on Instagram, companies come up with a percentage of Black people present, and unfortunately, it's been so disappointing that most of them have been so low. The most I've seen is 15%, 17%. So it's also very important to make sure that you incorporate Black voices in companies. Also education, that's also a very important aspect to support the Black community in, with curriculum, faculty members, which brings me to institutions. So institutions like UBC and other universities even, it's so important to make sure that the campus is somewhere that Black students feel very safe in. This can be done by the curriculum. I've spent my whole life learning about European history. Why do I know about all the popes, all the bishops and whatnot, but I can barely tell you about my history? That is a problem. It's time for institutions to incorporate Black history in their curriculums, because Black history is a huge part of world history. Humans did start in the continent of Africa, so it's very important to do that. Also, faculty members. It just disheartens me so much that I walk on this campus and I don't see any profs that look like me. I go into class learning about African history or just Black history for one lecture, but that one lecture is taught by someone that doesn't look like me. It doesn't feel the same at all. So I also urge institutions, please, please, please incorporate Black people in your faculty. And also support the students. Clubs like ACSC. I was an exec last year, an event coordinator, and it was Black History Month, but unfortunately we did not get as much support as we would have liked. So hopefully this changes. Hopefully we take so much from today and incorporate it into the future. Hopefully we start working towards a solution that's more sustainable for the Black community. Hopefully by next year even, the campus feels like a safer, more comfortable and supported place for Black students to just live their best lives. And finally, to my fellow Black brothers and sisters, my people, please take time. Take time to breathe. Take time to just reflect. Take time to take everything in. It's okay to be exhausted. I'm exhausted too. I'm tired. It's okay to just take some time off of social media. It's okay to rant. It's okay to scream. Do whatever you feel that will make you better. Do that. And we also know that with Black people, there has been generational trauma, but also remember that we also have generational resilience. We have been okay in the past, we will be okay, and we will be even stronger in the future. This is the time we need to use to create change. Black people are fed up. It's not okay to feed us a bone, to silence us for 2 weeks and have the same thing happen over and over again, have the same vicious cycle over and over again. It's time for us all to stick together with our allies by our sides to create sustainable change for Black people. This is the time for real change. And with that being said, I'm very appreciative of this platform that UBC has created in order to have these conversations, because it is very needed. It's very needed in this time. And no matter how uncomfortable it might be for some people, and I'm sure it is uncomfortable for some people, but people need to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is the first step towards working towards a better future. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and back to you, Pep.
Thank you, Binta. I'd now like to invite Ainsley Curry, Vice President, Students, UBC, to give his remarks. Over to you, Ainsley.
Pep, thank you for that introduction. And I would first like to say I am honored and privileged to be a part of this discussion today. I would also like to thank the Honorable Janet Austin for being a part of this conversation, and for the leadership at the Okanagan campus of UBC for being a part of this and coordinating this effort. First, let me introduce myself for some of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet. I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of British Columbia, and I have been here for about 1 year. Prior to UBC, I was at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles and worked at a number of universities throughout the United States before being a part of the Thunderbird and Heat family. I was born in New York and raised in Miami, Florida, and I was moved to New York by immigrant parents. My parents immigrated to the United States from Trinidad in the 1960s, so they saw post-civil rights America. And they remember schools being desegregated and the trauma that that created for so many young kids and themselves. They would be appalled to know that today many of those struggles still remain. I'm incredibly thankful for all of my friends and colleagues that have reached out to me in personal messages and emails and phone calls just to check in on me, watching what's going on in the United States, watching the global pandemic rip through many lives. I have had friends and colleagues who've reached out just to check in on me, and my family and I, we are incredibly grateful. I grew up well aware of the experiences of Black Americans. I had clues very early on in my life from teachers who showed me and taught me that my life would be different. Some of those teachers were doing it in a caring fashion to prepare me and protect me for the world ahead. Some of those teachers were doing it out of their own racism and prejudice. I recall growing up and even today being followed in grocery stores and department stores for no reason other than the color of my skin. I recall being lectured by my mom before I got on the road about how to be safe, what to do when the police pull you over, how to respond, and how to follow instructions. I recall walking along the sidewalk and having women clutch their purse while I walk by in a suit. All of these microaggressions have been part of my life, my entire life. I've been pulled over by the police at least a dozen times for reasons today I am still unaware of. And I have always been mindful that anytime this police officer could have taken my life. But I remain hopeful. I remain hopeful by the movement that we see today. I'm often asked by my colleagues and friends about the term Black Lives Matter. And I often hear, don't all lives matter? The truth about the Black Lives Matter movement is that they said Black Lives Matter also. They never said Black Lives Matter only. The Washington Post recently did a survey. From 2015 until today, there have been 1,125 deaths as a result of the hands of police officers of Black Americans. African Americans represent about 12% of the United States population, yet they are almost 30% of the deaths at the hands of police officers. A Black male between the ages of 15 and 30 is more likely to be killed, 2.8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than their peers and colleagues. Yet I remain hopeful. I am hopeful today because of the students that we just heard from. I am hopeful because of the energy these young adults bring to this conversation. I'm hopeful today because many of the protests that we see throughout the United States and around the world are peaceful. Martin Luther King said in his 1968 speech, The Other America, he said, protest is the voice of the unheard. Protest is a tool to change. It's a part of the process. And it is how the unheard vocalize themselves. I remain encouraged today that this issue has received global attention because it is a public health crisis. When a significant portion of the population suffers from a number of health disparities, when a global pandemic rips through the world and takes more Black lives than any other lives, it is because of the stress and weathering that many Black people live under throughout their entire lives. What's going on now is part of that public health challenge. And we should think about solutions as if this were a public health dilemma. And there are many solutions if we thought about them as public health. I remain encouraged today because the young adults that are here. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I always think about the world as it will be for her, because I won't always be here. But I need young people, like the people who are here today, and the people who are out on the streets today, to be prepared to lead this world when I am gone and create a better world for her. I appreciated today that there was some acknowledgement of the role of higher education. I think this is an important changing point. We are giving birth to the next leaders of this country and of this world. Sitting in our classrooms today are the next Barack Obamas, are the next leaders of countries, are the next college presidents, are the next prime ministers, teachers and educators and police officers are being trained in our classrooms right now. How will we make them better? One of the observations that I've had as I wrap up my comments, higher education in Canada needs to do a better job of collecting data. Right now, when students tell me that they're the only student of color in an engineering class, I can't dispute that because we don't have any data that says otherwise. And then I ask my colleagues, can we start collecting data of the students who are on our campus? Race, ethnicity, gender? No, we can't do that because the law says we can't do that. I've yet to be able to find the law that says that, but we have no idea who's on our campus. At the same time, we have no idea about the instructors and the faculty members who are in our classrooms. Many of our students have said they have never been taught by a faculty member of color in their 4th and 5th year of enrollment. We have to do a better job of diversifying our student body and diversifying our faculty. And the answers to this are not mysterious. We have the template in the work that's been done around truth and reconciliation and the efforts done to make sure we indigenize our spaces in our campus. And that template exists to think about how we diversify our student body and our faculty. I would also recommend that we don't get into the oppression Olympics. Your drama is worse than mine, and here's why. There's a better way to solve these problems, and there's space for everyone to move ahead. But as we begin competing people of color against people of color, that is a no-win race. We have to get out of that fight and make sure that there's room for everyone. The last piece of advice I would offer for higher education is think about how we build the pipeline. In addition to what we do on our own campus, we have a lot of work to do in the K through 12 system. How can we begin encouraging young kids to aspire to higher education? What can we do to play a role in making sure that students of color are interested in pursuing higher education degrees and opportunities? And we can't start when they're in the 9th grade. We've got to go back to pre-K. We've got to go back to 1st grade and help these young people find mentors and role models at the next level. Again, I am incredibly thankful for all of my friends and colleagues who have said kind words to me during these very difficult times. As you can imagine, this pains me to my soul. Watching what's going on in the States and the opportunities that we have in Canada are very difficult for me personally. And I thank you for your support during these times. And I look forward to the work we have ahead of us.
Thank you, Ainsley. I'd like to invite Ananya Mukherjee Reid, Provost and Vice President, Academic, UBC Okanagan, to offer her comments. Over to you, Ananya.
Thank you, Pep. First of all, let me thank all of you who are participating in this panel today and this fantastic team on the UBC Okanagan campus who have put this together so quickly and with so much passion and so much commitment. It is such a privilege to work with people who work out of commitment and not out of the thought that they have to do something. So a big thank you to all of you. I am also, as all of you said, deeply honored to be part of this conversation that we are starting here today. I've not been here too long. I've come a little bit over a year. And I did have the opportunity to attend the Black History Month event. It was an incredibly moving event. And I remember one of the students, this line she had, "My name is Sandra, and I'm not defined by the color of my skin." I also remember one of our past presidents of the Student Union of UBC Okanagan, who used to say, "Together we will build UBC." And she used to use it as a refrain in her speeches, and I always found it so inspiring. So it is in that spirit of building UBC that we are here today. Let me begin with a few words from Maya Angelou's immortal poem, "Still I Rise." Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your lies, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. These words are the ultimate celebration of resilience. I had heard Maya Angelou for the first time during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. I was then an international student at the University of Southern California. As the riots grew in intensity, we were asked to evacuate student housing for a safer place. And it's in that transit towards the safer place that I remember hearing Dr. Angelou's words, and they have lingered with me ever since. Ever since hearing them for the first time, I have found myself seek strength in these words time and again. However, today, while I still fully embrace the power of these words, I do not wish to celebrate resilience. I'm tired of celebrating resilience. I'm tired of being resilient, as I know many of you are. Instead, I wish to focus on what we can change in those structures and systems which would make such resilience unnecessary. Today, I seek strength in another short line from Maya Angelou. Nothing will work unless you do. So how can I get to work? How can we get to work? Black scholars, leaders, and activists, and as the students we heard today, have already given us some solutions. My hope is that we can focus on at least 3 things, beginning now and beginning at this institution. First, we need to activate spaces to speak and hear of experiences of anti-Black racism. These spaces have to include the entire institutional fabric of the university, from classrooms, cafeterias, informal learning spaces, the Senate, the committees, the faculty councils, the administration, and the board. 2, we need to accelerate the discussion on curriculum. Binta spoke about it. This is a constant refrain we hear from students. This is a long-standing demand of Black scholars, and a lot of work is already underway in academia. However, these seem yet not to have entered the core of all academic knowledge production. They remain in the periphery, and this is what we need to change as soon as possible. Step 3. We need to find ways to increase the presence of Black students and faculty in our institution. We don't have data, but we see the absences. This needs work at multiple levels, beginning from our own minds and consciousness, and all the way up to the policies, the legal frameworks, the hiring processes that determine recruitment. And as Ainsley said, this work needs to begin much, much earlier. We see and hear how aspirations are killed early on so that people don't even feel they want to enter paths like the academia. They don't want to participate in knowledge production. So we need to begin as soon as possible and build a pathway from K-12 to colleges to universities, and then all the way up to the professional circles. Finally, and this has also been mentioned, we need to activate allyship. There is some wonderful scholarship and justice scholarship around how to build alliances. As Cornel West observed about George Floyd's funeral, which by the way I was moved to tears to see the funeral and then to hear Cornel West. But as he emphasized, this is a moment to build the broadest possible coalitions against all forms of exclusion. In other words, we must begin to speak against anti-Black racism, but we cannot use that as an excuse to forget about other forms of racism towards indigenous peoples, towards Asian peoples, peoples of color, people of different sexual orientation, and so on. Neither can we forget to speak about homelessness, poverty, hunger, unemployment, gender inequity, and so on. In other words, we must continue in what Cornel West called the best tradition of leadership of Black activism, which is to fight for justice in every sphere of society. And that brings me back full circle. I said I don't want to celebrate resilience. I want to seek change. But I know, as all of you have already pointed out, that we need courage and we need resilience and we need allyship and we need courage and we need resilience and we need allyship. And we need to speak of our experiences that will may make people uncomfortable, may make us uncomfortable, but that has to be the beginning. I really hope this session today is a beginning towards those goals. Thank you. And back to you, Pep.
Thank you, Ananya. I'd like to take a moment to thank all the panelists for sharing with us today. Also, for this part of the program, Her Honorable Janet Austin is open to take questions as well. It is now time to begin the more open portion of this program, and we're going to move to the Q&A session. Just to remind you how to engage the panel, you just need to click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, and everyone in the audience today can vote for questions that are more important to them by clicking, giving it a thumbs up. And we do have some questions in top on the list. As a faculty, we are working on a plan to walk through the Me and White Supremacy Workbook together as an initial starting point. I don't think deciding on actions and strategies before doing foundational work to acknowledge and reflect how white supremacy impacts each of us is internalized will sustain an anti-racist practice long time. I'd love to know if and how others are taking on this personal work. So in other words, what can we do personally at a foundational level to begin to unwork the, I guess, the racism that's internalized? Ananya, would you like to start to comment on that?
I could, but I don't know that I am the right person. I think I would ask Jane, Binta, or Ainsley to take that. And then I'll come back.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jane.
So with that, a sentence that gets thrown around a lot, and Binta mentioned it in her speech, was the term educate yourself. And when we say educate yourself, it's not only just picking up a book and reading and saying, yes, I have worthwhile knowledge on like racism and all the issues that come with it. It's not just that. It's also about going through the history. Like, how did this start? What's the correlation? How did we get to this point? I think personally, if you go through like years worth of history and years worth of like from the transatlantic slave trade till like now, you can see lots of correlations and get a deeper understanding. For example, like let's take the police systems that are in place within society right now. They stemmed originally from the fact that they were established because they were supposed to capture runaway slaves. The badges are identical to the ones that existed within that time, specifying that this is someone who was hired to capture runaway slaves. And that now it's just been changed to the term law enforcement. It's like they just made it really pretty, but that's not what happened. If you can start from the history and see where everything kind of originated, you would get a better understanding, and you'll be able to not be able to like see properly how we see it from our side, but you can get a more proper perspective on like what we're saying when we say A is not A, but instead A is like Z. So yeah, I think like with that, you should definitely just go and do your own research and sit down and just understand what is racism, why did it establish, where is it coming about, and when you start doing that, you realize that a lot today is just racism, but it's just tied under like a pretty little bow right now. Yeah.
Binta?
So there's that question again. Again, as I said, take initiative to educate yourself. There's a reason why, especially regarding curriculum, there's a reason why Black history isn't part of curriculums in educational institutions, because there's a plan which is to make Black people forget their history and for us to assimilate and just focus on white history. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is that there is no world history without Black history. So that portion of world history is taken out of these school curriculums so that we as Black people forget our history, we forget the greatness in which we came from, we forget the power that we do have, because in learning that, it also gives us more power, it gives us more ammunition to work towards dismantling systematic racism, to work towards making places our own, to work towards educating our people even more about Black power. So it's not a coincidence that wherever you go in each educational institution, Black history isn't a part of it. So again, educate yourselves, take initiative, even Google it, how do I become an anti-racist? The book Ibrahim Kendi, How to Become an Anti-Racist, will come forth. White Fragility will come forth. You don't like to read books? Okay. Netflix, the 13th, When They See Us, Malcolm X. You don't like to watch series, podcast, everything. It's so present. You don't like to listen? You can read blacklivesmatter.com. Go under resources. There's a specific resource for white people. Everything is there. So again, just all you need to do is take initiative. You don't need to ask a Black person, how do I support Black people? Because we already have enough to deal with. So just take initiative. I promise you, you do not need validation from a Black person to do so. Thank you. Back to you, Pep.
Anyone else in the panelists who would like to comment? Okay.
Just for me, I grew up in India, so it is a highly unequal society. There's lots of different forms of inequity that I saw and learned about. And we had read about the civil rights movement, the situation of Blacks in the US, but it was totally different for me when I arrived in Los Angeles and started living in downtown LA. And what I saw in terms of the relationship between white and Black, the situation of Hispanic refugees, that gave me a different insight, which I did not have from books. And the irony of that is often those things are in front of our eyes, but because we don't have the analytical framework, we're not taught that in school or in university, we actually don't see even what is right in front of our eyes. So this mutually reinforcing relationship between the education through all of the means of education and the experience of seeing people going through a certain kind of discrimination, that for me was highly educational, humbling, and yes, I don't know, I'm at a loss for words to explain what kind of impact that had on me living in downtown LA.
Thank you. So we have a question directed at Dr. Ainsley. What will UBC do about far-right speakers coming to campus who have been criticized as racist? Does UBC's definition of academic freedom include racist ideas?
Thank you for this question. I think this is a good question that will continue to be examined as we move forward, especially today. This is such an opportunity to dive into these critical points. Throughout the history of higher education around the world, there have been far right and far left speakers who have introduced ideas into the academy and the academic space that were considered heresy at the time. Science, gender issues, issues of race, issues of culture, and now many of those topics are a core part of our curriculum, and they have been established science. So higher education has always seen speakers on both far rights and left when new ideas were being introduced into the spaces. Some of you may recall in the 1960s at Berkeley and other universities, students took action against universities who were curtailing speech and said, no, let all speech come on board, and the university should not block out speakers. The university should allow all ideas, offensive and supportive, to come to campus, because there was a period of time where universities would not allow these speakers to come on campus, and students in the 60s and 70s fought against that. So the universities went the opposite direction by completely allowing anyone to set up a soapbox on campus and start speaking. Well, the evolution of that has changed. to now today, we are seeing speakers who are coming to campus and using that academic freedom platform to spew hate which leaves our communities fractured, people feeling unsafe, people feeling damaged. And that was not the intention nor the spirit of academic freedom. Academic freedom was intended to allow faculty members to teach critical subjects that may be unpopular in the classroom without fear of being removed from their teaching assignment and position. But now outside speakers who have different agendas have now used that context to come onto campus and preach hate in many cases. So universities all throughout the United States and here in Canada are re-examining academic freedom, far left and far right speakers, and safety of communities. I think that is the key component. Another component that has been added are the human rights that are impacted by speakers on campus. So our current policies do not contemplate the new complexities that we have in place, but that discussion is actively going on right now by our board, UBC's board and Senate, looking at new policies to address these issues on campus. So thank you for that question.
So the next question is referencing Santa Ono's statement, Together Against Racism. It references unconscious bias or implicit bias training for UBC public safety officers. I believe this type of training is needed beyond our public safety officers to all staff and all faculty. What would this training look like to be impactful, useful, and a powerful tool as well? Ananya,
That is best answered by you, I think, Pap. Did you want to answer that?
I'm the moderator. I first of all agree that everybody does require some training around implicit bias. In fact, the statement is, if you have a brain, you are biased. But a lot of times, we naturally anchor ourselves towards seeing other people's biases and not ourselves. So ideally, if you do the training, also you introduce language and create spaces where people can safely call out bias. So it's, yes, you have the training, but you also have language and an environment that when bias shows up, you know to call it. You know it's okay if I point it out. Yes, everybody would benefit from this. And this is something that the Equity and Inclusion Office does. It's not yet institution-wide. And yes, this is something that we're working on to get it across campus. Thank you for that question. And then the next question is, so this person wants to know, what do you not, a big not, want to hear right now from your white friends and acquaintances? What's your pet peeve? Who would like to take that? Jane?
Okay, so a major thing that I would not like to hear would be, I'm sorry. Because I've been getting a lot of, I'm sorry this is happening, I'm sorry that this is a thing, I'm sorry, but I don't have time to think about apologies. I want to know, what are you going to do? Yes, we acknowledge that you feel regretful. Yes, we acknowledge that you feel bad. Okay, so what's gonna happen? Because most of the time whenever I get I'm sorry, it's like someone is telling me that because they feel guilty. It's not because they're genuinely sorry for what's happening, but I take it as you are just feeling guilty that you are finally seeing that there is something as privilege and there is something related to white supremacy going on here. So because of that guilt, you felt like it was necessary for you to reach out and just show that, like, yeah, I care about you. It's okay. I'm sorry. I apologize, but I really don't want to hear it. And there are some of my friends who agree. We really don't want to hear sorry. We want to hear, I'm going to go to a protest. I'm going to be there. I will rally with everyone. I'm going to start my own protest with the Black people in my community. I'm going to attend a protest being organized by someone in my community. I'm going to support Black businesses in my community. That's what we want to hear. We don't want to hear an apology, because if an apology worked, if a police officer or anyone would apologize to us, then no protest will be happening right now. So yeah, back to you, Pep.
Can I offer a response in that as well?
Sure.
I mentioned in my opening comments this conversation about all lives matter. And that sets up a competition that the Black Lives Matter movement says only Black Lives Matter. And the truth is, the request is that Black lives should matter also. The other day, I heard a great analogy that helped me explain this. If you're in your neighborhood and a house is on fire, and all of the neighbors are grabbing water and trying to put out the fire, and someone drives up and say, hey, what's going on here? And they say, hey, one of our neighbors, his house is on fire. We're trying to help him put out the house. And that person who drove up says, well, don't all houses matter? And then they say, yeah, but this one is on fire. Well, what about that house? Doesn't that house need water? And what about that house? Doesn't that house need water? Don't all houses need water? The point here is that this one is on fire right now. This one is in a crisis. Yes, all houses matter. And it never was intended to say only Black Lives Matter. It means Black Lives Matter also. And right now, the Black community is in a health crisis, a global health crisis. If you look at the number of people and number of countries that have responded to this, these are people of color all over the world who are saying, I struggle with George Floyd's story. That story is a story I'm familiar with. I've seen this happen in my community. So right now, we are trying to address a crisis, just like we have with a number of other cultures throughout Canada and the US and around the world, and it needs critical attention. And as we put out this fire, it helps all of the houses in the neighborhood. So the thing that is my pet peeve is when we can't see the bigger picture of what's going on and feel like this becomes exclusive to one group and one culture. For example, Drew Brees recently said, you know, my grandfather fought in the Civil War, therefore I don't like kneeling for the flag. But he didn't understand what people were kneeling for. So I think it's important, as the students have mentioned, educate yourself on the issue so you understand why people are kneeling and why people are peacefully protesting.
Binta?
Thank you. Just to add to what Mr. Curry has said, people that say all lives matter, I feel like if you stand for all lives matter, you should stand for Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter does not take away from the fact that all lives matter, because these are basic human rights. If you are for all lives, Black lives are also part of all lives. So you should be okay with that. So it doesn't make sense when people say all lives matter, because it's like, okay, all lives do matter. So you should be standing with Black Lives Matter. And a pet peeve of mine, I have mentioned it one or twice. How do I become an anti-racist? That's the biggest pet peeve of mine, because it's like white people are looking, not only white people, but just people that are not Black are looking for validation of Black people to say, oh, you're doing amazing, you know, tap on the back, you know, we should give you a certificate, you're doing amazing. And it's not how it should be. You should be taking on your role as an active ally of the Black community. Again, it comes back to educating yourself. And most Black people, you know, we're the ones that are always fighting for different groups. We're always fighting for different causes. So it would be nice if, you know, people would just go and take initiative, just take time, and just do their own research, just educate themselves on their own, instead of going to Black people to ask how do I use my white privilege for good. It's like, yeah, I'm already dealing with everything happening. I can't also help you to help me. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's where I stand. That's my biggest pet peeve. Back to you, Pep. Thank you.
So the next question is, how feasible would it be for UBC to make Black, Indigenous, people of color, history, education a requirement for every degree. Ananya, would you like to take that?
Yes, so with indigenous curriculum, we do have now indigenous content requirement in some of our degrees. So it has happened, and so there is absolutely not only possibility, but a lot of active work is going on through the leadership of Black scholars in this area. It is there is a gap between scholarship and activism and institutionalization of some of those. So the mandatory indigenous content requirement in some of the degrees have moved us in that direction. As Ainsley mentioned, the UBC Okanagan's response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission principles have moved us in that direction. So we have steps to build on where the histories of marginalized peoples and the voices and experiences of marginalized people through centuries can become the center of university instruction rather than remaining in the peripheries, which is where it's now. Yes, it can absolutely happen, and we will work to make it possible.
So the next question is, as already acknowledged, we often see institutions become reactive in situations such as this and hold events to minimize their lack of proactiveness. So moving forward, how can the Black community at UBCO, Okanagan, I guess even UBC, Vancouver, expect accountability and support from upper administrators like yourselves? We would like to take that. Binta?
Thank you, Pep. I think I'd say supporting, I've said this before, but I can't emphasize this enough, supporting Black students on campus. So even things like, again, Black History Month, it's such a huge celebration for the Black community. And it says a lot when the university does not also celebrate it in a big way. The university does not contact, in our case, the club that represents most Black people on campus, which is the ACSC. It's not right, and it does not look right or feel right if the university does not reach out and be like, oh, hey, because it's Black History Month, how can we help you? We know that this is a very important month for the Black community, and we want to reassure you that we UBC are here for you, and just let us know what you need and we'll provide it. That goes a long way, because that is a part of what makes UBC safe as an environment for Black students. Also, a Black student resource center might be so good, with counselors, even financial aid, to take on different aspects and just be a support system for the Black community. Because when we see people that look like us, it has such a great impact. It has such a great impact, and especially in places of higher education. It would mean so much to me if I could go into a Black student resource center to go talk to a counselor that looks like me, because that counselor, being Black, knows what I'm going through as a Black person and as a Black woman. So I think support and providing more resources for Black students would be amazing and would go a long way and would improve the Black student experience in UBC.
So with your leadership, our Students' Union leadership, I think Ainsley, myself, and Pep, we will make sure that we move in those directions. This doesn't just have to be words for today. We'll all love to work towards that.
Thank you.
So another question here that's asking about resources, interested in being directed towards the resources that list creative strategies on attracting diverse faculty. So how it's one thing to say that we need to increase the numbers, but can we specifically direct individuals towards resources or professions that generally, so right now what we have is professions that are generally dominated by a singular race or ethnicity. So identifying a gap in the resources available.
Can I answer that? Or
yes, please, Ananya.
So, before I came to UBC, I was at York University in Toronto for 23 years. And just before I left, we could launch a Black Studies program. And I was on particularly focusing on Black Canadian experiences. So universities can, with the support from faculty and scholars, universities can make those changes. But there are two ways of doing it. One is, creating areas like a Black Studies program, which will attract Black scholars. But the bigger challenge sometimes is in recruiting diverse scholars in every discipline. So not have it in particular disciplines. So that's what I was mentioning, that work needs to start from our question of our mind and consciousness, so through the unconscious bias. Not only the training, but exploring that, and then looking at some of our laws and policies which might require some change to make that possible. Again, it's not that work is not happening, but it probably needs to happen at 10 times the intensity than it's happening now. So whoever is on this call, I will ask for everybody's support for UBC Okanagan and UBC to be able to take this forward.
Okay, so I have another question. There are actually a couple of questions around how do we plan to fix the lack of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, especially Black and Indigenous faculty members. So changing our mindset is not going to work when the system of oppression prevents Black and Indigenous people from joining the faculty and continually claim of lack of funding. So tied to that, the person also asks around scholarship opportunities, as well as creating safe space for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color to be able to report cases of racism, implicit or explicit bias, lumping it all together. Ananya, you want to take that?
That was the easy question you kept for me. So all of those things have to be done. So, the speaking out against racism, that's one thing. But in terms of increasing representation in the university community and faculty, that work has to begin again, I would say, from school. So to support the transition to undergraduate education, to graduate education, then to postdoctoral, then into the academia, and then all the way through the academia from the assistant tenure to the full professor, right? Because at each of these levels we look now, there is a lack of representation, right from people coming into the university up to the full professor rank. There is an issue with how research funding is made available. So all of these, we cannot actually address this one at a time. This is the systemic part of it. It has to start from that school as early as possible, where aspirations are created and supports through scholarship and so on are established, to give those aspirations the proper support that they need. And then Blacks who enter the university as students have to be supported all the way through to the full professor rank within academia or other similar professional ranks in similar professions. And that requires, first of all, the material supports, the scholarships, the mentoring, and all of that for sure. But it also requires a shift in, where in Canada, where I see a problem sometimes is we say that it's not as bad here. And that creates a kind of denial of the problem and a denial of the experiences that our Black students undergo in their community schools, high schools, universities, and so on. So all of those material steps need to be taken, but we also must really stop denying at every level. And that's actually not easy to do, because it is like holding up a collective mirror. It's not easy. And so I would say these two things: the working of resources, the working together on all of these steps, and then shifting out of the denial that we're not as bad, and actually confronting what it is, collecting data, and deciding to resolve it.
Thank you, Ananya. So there is a comment here that's providing some input around collecting data. Thank you all, Ananya and Ainsley. If indeed there is a law that prohibits the official collection of data, and I don't know what this law is, there's another pathway, which we often do in Indigenous circles: collect the data informally ourselves through our networks, and word of mouth or caucuses, and report it independently. Just something to consider, and Shelley Lightfoot is happy to connect you with that resource. Now, there is another, moving on, sensitive about time. I work for the CUPE 2950 Union for UBC. The union's hiring policies are systematically racist. We must always consider internal candidates first. We always start with the same internal pool of people. Who can we talk to that will help us open up hiring to external candidates first, so that we can diversify the staff? That's an interesting one. So if the internal staff is already there's no diversity inside, how can you diversify? Who would like to take that?
So, union policies have to come through the union. I mean, there are processes through which the university administration negotiates particular agreements with the union, but the changes have to come from the union. So it won't happen by talking. No single person in the university has the authority to just change that, right? That has to come through a process, first of all, internal through the union. So I would, there are established processes, and I can connect people to those who can guide them, but the process is, it will need more than one or two conversations with the administration.
And let me add, the union is not composed of a group of foreign entities. The union is composed of employees in that union group. So there's a representative from your area that sits on the union decision-making table. And their first responsibility is to protect the employees that are in the union. So this is an opportunity to go to your representatives within the union and ask for some of these changes to be evaluated. And they may explain why that policy is in place, but it can be changed by the members of the union.
So the next question is for the Honorable. Sorry, it's shifted on my screen. I appreciate that UBC has created this safe space for conversations that can be sometimes difficult. I believe that we all need to be engaged to create a more just society. My interest is mainly on political and policy engagement, and I'm glad we have the Honorable Janet Austin participating in this discussion. My question is, how can we reduce the gap between those in power and those whose voices have been excluded from the table and decision making?
Well, I think that's an extremely important question, because it's really what I think all this is about. I do want to comment on, I saw there was another question a little farther down in the queue that I would like to comment on, and that was a question about whether the tagline, different together, could be conflated with all lives matter. And so I think it's important to address that, because I certainly understand that the saying all lives matter diminishes the historic and current economic and social realities that have contributed to the situation that we're dealing with today. And it's it's understandably offensive, and I think ever since I've heard it, I have understood that. When we put together the Different Together campaign, it predated the enormous protests that we have seen emerging around the world, and was in fact a response to the racism flowing from the COVID-19 situation. And the idea was not to exclude, but to include. But I can absolutely see how that might be confusing for people. And so what I would say to that is that we may need to rethink that. It may, in fact, be sending the wrong message, a message that wasn't intended. And if that is the case, then I am more than willing to look at that and see how that can be a better reflection of what the intention is. With respect to how we actually create some difference in society about leadership, I think that's a fundamental question. And I think the answer really is in looking at the kinds of policy reforms that actually help to create greater equality in society. There's been a lot of discussion, as there should be, today about education. Access to education is fundamental, starting right with high quality early learning and care, which many children do not or have not had access to. I've been an advocate for investment in education really my entire professional and volunteer life. As Lieutenant Governor, I can't participate directly in public advocacy the way I have in the past, because my role requires me to be neutral and nonpartisan and not engage directly in subjects that are the subject of current political debate. But I can use the evidence base to draw attention and to bring profile to issues that are of real concern in society, and clearly this is one. But I think really, if we're looking for broad change, we need to look at the kinds of policy frameworks that we have in place that equalize opportunities for people, set them up for success throughout life. That is critical. Some of the things that we've discussed here today as well, I think when people understand or start to understand, make an effort to understand, and do take some of the actions that have been suggested here today, I believe that we can see real shifts in the way power is distributed throughout society. But it's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require goodwill. It's going to require people like me to sacrifice some of the privileges that we, in fact, currently have and have had throughout our lives. So that's a reality of the situation that we're dealing with. I guess all I can say is that I am deeply concerned about what we have seen emerging. I have worked through much of my professional life to try to address systemic inequalities, of which this is one. But there is so much more work to be done, and I appreciate the thoughts and the perspectives that have been raised here today, very much indeed.
Thank you. So the next question is touching a little bit about how can I talk to non-Black people of color about Black Lives Matter if they feel like their oppression has been ignored and are thus bitter about the movement? Who would like to take that?
No, I think one thing that's come through today is it's not about, just because we speak up against anti-Black racism doesn't mean we negate. It's not about denial. It's about affirming the anti-Black experience. That doesn't mean we have to deny something else. And I feel very, very strongly about that it is really about affirming the experiences of marginalization and not about denying it. And that's what you would say to any person interested in justice. That's all you need to say.
Yes, and I'd add, this is a real question. I've heard multiple times from other groups who add their tagline into anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-Indigenous, and so on and so on, out of fear of being left out of the current movement, of the movement of today. This has been kind of the oppression Olympics, right? So we have to avoid that, because in the end, we end up not making progress on either one when we attempt to lump them all together and they're ill-defined. And it creates a lot of animosity among groups. It's the crabs in the bucket scenario. So I do think there's a space and a place to help all groups rise. And we should think about those ways as we think about doing this work. But all of the work is specific, right? So the issues that are faced by the indigenous communities are very specific. The anti-racism that Asian communities face is very specific. And so too is the anti-Black racism. It is very specific and needs to be addressed in specific ways. And to the degree that we create blanket solutions, we end up not serving anyone. So we should take our time, focus, just like Canada has done with Truth and Reconciliation, and focus and drill down and create real solutions that address that group specifically, and then move to other communities as those arise. But I don't think anyone should be left behind in any of these movements.
Thank you. We still have lots of questions, but sensitive about the time, I will. Thank you for this engaging and important discussion. I'd like to invite Ali Pustazaden, the president of UBC Okanagan Student Union, to give the closing remarks. Over to you, Ali.
Oh, sorry, I was muted, but thank you so much for the introduction, Pep. And thank you all for speaking on this important issue and sharing your perspectives, as well as all of you who are taking the time to watch virtually. I feel incredibly honored and privileged to have the opportunity to present some closing remarks among all these incredible leaders that you've just heard from. I grew up in Vancouver, which is generally regarded as an extremely multicultural and diverse city, one of the most diverse in Canada and in North America. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to attend an after-school program. It's the type where they take care of you and keep you busy until your parents are done with work or school. And there's a staff person there named Heather. She was one of the first people I remember truly looking up to. And one time I remember vividly, I recall sitting at a table coloring with her, and I said, "Can you hand me the skin color one?" Referring to the peach colored pencil. And without a second of hesitation, she held up the pencil and said, "Does this look like me?" She said, "Does this look like you?" She said, "Then what makes it skin color?" And obviously, as a child, I was scared and confused because I was being yelled at by this person, but because that was the first time I was exposed to that. And up until then, my teachers and classmates had referred to that same color of pencil as skin color, and nobody batted an eye at me or batted an eye or told me any different. Reflecting on this story, it's easy for me to see why discrimination is so prevalent today. It's because we're brought up with that, and that's in our life constantly. This last month, we've seen worldwide outrage calling attention to systematic racism, and we're living in a time of extraordinary uncertainty, heightened tension, and enormous opportunity for societal change. And yet I wonder, why now? Why is it that every few years we undergo a cycle where a deplorable act of racism is caught on video and kickstarts a new movement? Yet we see no change. There's still no change. It just keeps coming up and up and up. And this isn't a news cycle for Black people. It's a constant factor in their lives. It's a constant factor that is in society. And 3/4 of Canadians polled state that they're not racist. Yet nearly 50% admit to having racist thoughts. And over 50% stated racism was either a minor problem in society or not a problem at all. This shows a major disparity. And for change to happen, it requires outrage to not just come in increments every few years, but it must be constant until tangible change is seen. Despite the incredible conversation arising around how we can work to dismantle racism and white supremacy in our workplaces, academic spaces, and our personal lives, we can't forget what brought this this conversation back into the mainstream. A little over 2 weeks ago, George Floyd was arrested by Minneapolis police and was murdered by an officer, while 3 other officers stood by and prevented bystanders from assisting him, all over a $20 bill. His murder wasn't precipitated by his actions, but by the color of his skin. And I just learned today that Thomas Lane, the officer who held his legs down as he was murdered, made bail to the equivalent of $1 million Canadian, which was at least partially funded by donations from the public. That shows the state of North American society where people are willing to contribute their money towards that. In the United States, 33% of the prison population is Black. As Ainsley mentioned earlier, 24% of police killings are Black Americans, despite only making up 1/8 of the total population. In the US, 1.7 million students are in school with no counselors, 3 million with no nurses, 6 million with no psychologists, 10 million with no social workers, and all of those students have a police officer in their school. And I'm sure you can guess where these schools are located and what demographic a majority of those students are. This is systematic. And many people see these numbers and say, wow, I'm so glad I live in Canada. Just 1 week ago, Chantel Moore, a 26-year-old woman, was shot and killed in her own home by police officers. This was in New Brunswick. In this country, one which prides itself on diversity, equality, and multiculturalism, 1/3 of victims shot by the RCMP between 2007 and 2017 were Indigenous, a group which also makes up 30% of inmates, despite making up 4.8% of our population. In Toronto, the Black community makes up less than 10% of the population, but accounts for 70% of deadly police shootings. None of these statistics are a coincidence. They are fundamentally rooted in the immense lack of oversight over our law enforcement, racial profiling, and a system which was made to disadvantage specific groups of people. We spend $15 billion a year as a nation on policing, a system which in its current form is not only failing to keep our marginalized communities safe, but also actively oppressing them. Imagine what we gain by allocating funding towards initiatives that provide support for communities and create change from the ground up. It's time for us to shift the conversation away from momentary outrage and towards creating real lasting change, whether that be urging the government to reallocate billions away from the systems which oppress Black people and people of color, and educating those communities and providing mental health supports and other services to empower them. This conversation can't just be another cycle or trend, because it affects people who live with this every single day. Black lives matter every single day, and not just in America, but in every corner of the world. And it's not just a hashtag, it's a fact. We must be consciously working to break the shackles of oppression, because it's the right thing to do, it's the human thing to do, and not just when it looks good on social media. Nothing will change until those who are not affected by these issues see it as something that they need to solve rather than something that they need to empathize with. Earlier, a resource center was mentioned. I'm proud to say that the Student Union has committed this year to establishing one in the upcoming year, specifically to promote diversity on our campus, because that's real, tangible change, and we need commitment from groups like ours and the university to who have the ability to make that change, to promote it and actively support it. That same way that Heather, 2 decades ago, with a simple correction influenced the course of my life, the UBC community and all of you have immense influence which can cause change in our communities, to work together to encourage empathy, compassion, and progress towards change that creates an equitable society. Thank you again for all being here and part of that conversation, whether you spoke or watched. I felt incredibly honored to hear you all speak on these important issues. I hope that this isn't just a one-time event. I hope this is a constant conversation. And I hope it's not just because of the time that's going on or the riots or what you see on the news. I hope this is because we're genuinely outraged that this still has a place in our society. Listening, learning, and teaching and participating are the first steps towards lasting change. Thank you again. I'll send it back to Pep to end it off. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. This brings our session to an end. We invite you to tune in to our next session that will be announced shortly. And this session is being recorded, so you can get a copy of that. Thank you and have a great evening.
Can I just thank everybody and say how proud I am of our students? We all are. I just want to say it to everybody who's watching. We're wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Ditto. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you for having us.
Good job. Looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you so
Me too.
Do we need to keep doing this?
We do. It needs to be a constant conversation.
We will. We will.